So you know it's not a crime to be fascinated by all things criminal. And if you do like delving into the underworld, why not join us for a special live show on March 27th at the Cork Opera House. We'll be talking about the making of a cartel and all the wild and crazy stories that happened along the way. So why not join us for this special live show? Tickets from corkpodcastfestival.ie. A little bit sometimes these people like cockroaches, you know, you think if they've been stamped out and they're back again. And of course, I'm talking about the Waldron brothers, who we have spent the last couple of years following the Criminal Assets Bureau in their case against them, visiting the homes that they were going to take from them, detailing how many assets they had collated after their criminal careers. And now we're back again. There's been a major big drug seizure over the past couple of months, and it's now been linked to the Waldrons. They're trying to claw back their lost money.
Yeah, I mean, in total, we've added it up. The total amount is of seizures they've been linked over recent months or over recent years, I suppose, adds up to something like 35 million euros worth of drugs.
They're just their losses.
Well, they're their losses, yeah, now, and that's over a long period. And some of these seizures, they may be that they're part of a conglomerate buying the drugs, but...
And you're talking street value of that, you're not talking
street
the wholesale value.
No.
Because that it does skew things a little bit.
It skews things quite significantly.
Yeah. I mean, it's people listening, because when there's a seizure, those who have bought it have probably bought it for a fraction of the cost that is put out there as the value of it, because the value of it is street value. So the wholesale value is obviously going to be, what, a tenth, if even?
Something like that. I mean, it depends. Absolutely, it would be something in that general area.
Well, it would be less bloody frightening to think that the Waldrons had losses of 35 million over a couple of years, because that would mean their profits were 350.
Yeah.
Because it's always seen about a tenth goes missing, or that's generally... accepted. So 3.5 is more reasonable.
Yeah, but that also, so what you've seen with the demise of the Kinahan cartel, you've seen that a number of these, their former associates have clearly remained in the drugs business. Now, the Waldrons would have been very much linked to the Kinahan cartel. But we've seen other people as well, people that would have been associates of Peadar Keating operating in Clondalkin. These guys have really struck out on their own. Now, the Kinahans may well have some role in the importation of drugs into the country. But unlike in previous times, they have no interest in directing operations once it lands. So the Waldrons would have remained heavily involved in the drugs business, and it is believed that they're part of these conglomerates that come together to buy drugs. Now, we saw that this recently down in another seizure that we can't get into for legal reasons because some people are before the courts, but it seemed in that occasion at least, the family gang were involved, and a former associate of Peadar Keating's was also involved, and they pool their money basically, and they buy these shipments when they come in. Now, the Waldrons are, have been heavily involved in serious drug dealing for, almost well over 2 decades at this stage.
They go way back to Marlow Highlands days in Finglas, in the Finglas area, and onwards. They would have been associates of Eamon the Don Dunn.
Yeah.
The Bradley brothers, names like that from the past.
I mean, they were their contemporaries. Actually, I think in one of the cab cases to do with David Waldron, who'd be regarded as being possibly the more senior of the two brothers, David and Christopher, they listed some of his associates, and it included 5 people who're no longer with us. Some of the people he would have began being heavily involved with in terms of drugs back into 2000s. They include Mick Kelly, known as the Panda, who was shot dead by the real IRA, Richard Keogh, a drug dealer from Cabra, like just up the road from the Waldrons, who was shot dead in Spain, Daithí Douglas, Eamon the Don Dunn, and Darren Kearns, who was also shot dead.
David Daithí Douglas and Darren Kearns were close associates of David Waldron. The Waldrons were associates of the Kinahans, and yet Daithí Douglas and Darren Kearns are both understood. Well, I mean, Douglas's murder has been solved, and Fat Freddie Thompson is serving a life term for that. I believe the investigation is still open into Darren Kearns's murder, but it is understood to have been carried out by the Kinahan mob or their associates or under their orders. Kearns, of course, is the cousin of David Waldron's wife, Charlene Waldron, who did attempt to lay claim on some of those properties that the Criminal Assets Bureau were attempting to seize. So that's a bit of a mess, all of that.
It is a bit of a mess.
As usual, you have to try and untangle it and work out what has happened and what's occurred. I think Kearns and David Daithí Douglas were certainly blamed they were accused of possibly being the two men in the car outside the Red Cow at a point in time just before the Regency when Daniel Kinahan and others fled, believing that there was some sort of a planned assassination attempt on them. Now, Daithí Douglas certainly believed that he had given enough evidence to the Kinahan organisation to prove that he wasn't there. He'd got an alibi and was comfortable enough in that alibi to be walking around and doing his normal things when he was shot dead. And obviously Darren Kearns it was Christmas Eve, I think, and he was out for a family meal in a Chinese restaurant and came downstairs and was shot dead. Daithí Douglas had survived a gun attack at that stage. Kearns was then killed, and Daithí Douglas, they came from the second time.
Yeah, so all of these people, I suppose, if you traced it back far enough, were all possibly operating as in that one sort of criminal organisation. Before it all went wrong, I mean, Darren Kearns would have been a very close associate of Gary Hutch. They would have been arrested together on previous by guards. But of course it all fell apart. Now, the Waldrons would have certainly been very tight in with Eamon the Don Dunn. Eamon Dunn would have seemed to have run a franchise for the Kinahan cartel, really stretching across Cabra and Finglas, Ballymun, and a large part of Blanchardstown. Probably he inherited that gang from Marlow Highland, and that would have been one of the bigger outfits in the country. But when Eamon Dunn was killed, the Waldrons just sipped into his place, really, and they had a very sort of strong working relationship with the Kinahan cartel.
How do you continue being a successful drug dealer in Ireland when we're talking about you regularly on Crime World, when the guards obviously know who you are? There's a constant watching brief over your activities, your monies. It must be more and more difficult. Somewhat higher up the chain you go, how longer you've been in the business. You'd wonder how they keep it all going. And then you have the phones, which you're bound to be very paranoid about these days.
Yeah, look, I mean, they are staying one step away from any drugs that are delivered. I mean, in all of those seizures, there's a number of people before the courts, and that's why we're not going into them in detail. But in each of those cases, they're never going to be linked directly back to those drug seizures. But I think what happens is...
There's been a modus operandi, though, in recent years, while these, people would have for years and years and years got away with not getting charged or brought before the courts because they weren't physically hands-on the product. I mean, we've seen with a lot of these groupings that there has been two separate sort of strands to the investigation of the Gardai. First is intelligence-led, seizing the product, which causes them huge problems because that relentless kind of operations, 3.5 million, I'm saying, isn't an enormous... It is quite a lot of money if you have to repay it.
It's a huge amount.
And you just start getting yourself into this situation that you're constantly in credit or constantly in debt. So it's a nightmare and you have to keep going with it. But I mean, the Waldron brothers, if these drug seizures are constantly being linked back to them, it's a no-brainer that in the background there is an investigation into an overarching organised crime group and the directorship of that.
Yeah, I mean, what we can certainly see in some other cases where they'd set up these distribution hubs in the Midlands, where they would store large amounts of drugs and then move them out to clients across the country. They're a national drug dealing operation, while they might be based in North Dublin. And I suppose like the Bomber Kavanagh way of operating, they have these separate little cells that control each bit of the operation. So they may feel there is a protection. But you're right. I mean, most of these guys, they keep going because they have these, they're like proper businesses. They have debts. They're basically, they need to keep in business in order to stay alive effectively.
You can't sell out.
You can't get out. I mean, if you look at what the Criminal Assets Bureau took off David Waldron in particular, I mean, they managed to take, I think it was in total, the value of the properties that they seized was something like 3.3 million.
That's a lot.
Yeah. So, and, you know, they obviously took a huge mansion in County Wexford in a place called Darview, a 4-bedroomed, I think it was. You know, absolutely stunning mansion with walk-in wardrobes. We spoke about it before. A games room. And that was just one of the properties. He also had a property in Leixlip and a property in Cabra that was taken. And after they were taken, Detective Chief Inspector Michael Gubbins said it just highlighted the value of the Bureau's work in the community. And he said this was an individual who over 20 years amassed well over 3.3 million, which they expended on 3 properties, which the Bureau have taken to the High Court and proven the case that these are the proceeds of crime. And I think it establishes why the Bureau was established, and more importantly, it sends a message.
And it all forms part, really, then, of an overarching case of this existence of this organised crime group. And, you know, it's sort of like this is the new way that the Gardai are investigating these people and we see them coming before the courts. They seem untouchable until they fall. And when they fall, they're gone in like overnight nearly.
100%. And these seizures, we're seeing these huge seizures across the country. But when you do sort of get into the weeds of it, you see really how the drug business is operating. And a lot of it are, there's maybe 10 organised crime bosses or groups they're pooling together their resources and they're buying these drugs off specialist importation gangs, really. And there is a huge amount of money to be made. But the business has changed from when the Kinahans were doing everything. I mean, they were literally buying the drugs in South America, getting them across the ocean, getting them to Spain, and then getting them all around Europe, and then delivering them to individual dealers. The business has changed, but the Waldrons, you know, through those contacts that it developed over those many, many years, and that gang, the Eamon Dunn gang, was also prolific across the country, had connections with Sligo gangs, Limerick gangs, and even down in Cork. And the Waldrons maintained that. But they're simply, you know, they're just a constant target, really, aren't they?
They for sure they are. Yeah. I mean, if I was them now, I wouldn't be lying straight in my bed at night. I'd be waiting for the next knock on the door. But that's just the way I operate. It wouldn't have been a world for me anyway.
No.
Okay. Thanks, Niall.
Thanks, Nicola.
If you're a crimeworld.com subscriber, you've probably already binged on our latest exclusive podcast series, The Regency 10 Years On, from the hit that changed gangland forever. This 6-part anniversary special revisits that fateful day when David Byrne was shot dead at the Northside Hotel, igniting a bloody feud between the Kinahan and Hutch gangs, one of the deadliest rivalries in Irish history. Here's a taste of the new series, exclusive to crimeworld.com subscribers. So that Friday was one of those really quiet days. I mean, we all knew that Daniel Kinahan was in Dublin for the Clash of the Clans boxing weigh-in. At least we knew he was due into Dublin the next day. That Clash of the Clans bout match had been heavily advertised. But the day itself there was just little going on.
So there was very little happening that day. It's February. It's kind of a quiet enough time for news in general. And Alan Cherry and Ernie Leslie were on the road. They were at another story, actually, in Finglas.
What was that, do you remember?
Well, it was one of these classic sort of district court stories where a guy had, I think some teenagers had thrown stones at his car and he got out and slapped the teenager. Always great kind of human stories because some people feel sorry for the teenagers and some people don't. And so Alan had been out there. But the guy had moved on. He'd called out to his house to see if he wanted to talk. He'd moved on. He wasn't there. And we discussed going to the Regency earlier. And I said, look, just go along and see what happens. Divert there. We obviously weren't expecting anything. And obviously that point of Alan being there would be the subject of conspiracy, but we'll get into that at a later point.
For sure. So it was a case really that day of, one thing hadn't worked out, so go to the next. But also there was definitely a general sense of, if we could be there, just in case.
Yes, and as you said, to see who was standing beside the Kinahans and who wasn't from that bigger organised crime group. So Alan and Ernie went out. I got a call. I think you got a call almost simultaneously, but I got a call from Alan. I'd spoken to him earlier on the day saying, see what happens. And he phoned me up and said, there's after been a shooting and I think we've got a picture. And I actually went, yeah, very funny. But of course, he stopped me and said, no, I'm serious. We're after, there's some guys come out with a gun, there's shots fired, and there's total and utter chaos. And, our first thought is, get yourself safe. I have to admit, my second thought was, I hope they did get good pictures. But, you're still thinking they have to get safe. I mean, I know you probably got a similar call because Ernie and Alan obviously were in the same Jeep.
And of course, Ernie's the guy taking the photographs,
yes.
So he's on the phone to me. So I actually had gone for a pizza for lunch and I had come back over to the office and the phone rings and it was Ernie. And I answered and he was panicked on the other end of the phone. This was real high octane stuff. And he's still trying to take photos. He's trying to tell me what's happened. He's told me he thinks he's got a good one of one of the shooters as they were running from the scene. He was trying to call up the photograph on the back of his camera.
Yeah.
Because it would have taken him a while to get it onto a screen, but he'd also sent it into the office.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So he was kind of in the middle of doing a number of things. And as I was on the phone to him from memory, the photograph came into the office and we put it up on the big screen. And it was clear to see that this wasn't just one of the shooters as he suspected, but it was two. One of them was dressed as a woman.
Which is, of course, there was also this confusing story about guards coming in with weapons, and obviously we know now that they weren't ERU guys, they were guys dressed as them. But Alan was telling me this, there was talk of these guards, and then obviously there was, the crowd fleeing from the scene. So it was all confusing. But as you said, Ernie had taken a picture of the back of his camera. People will know what the photographer's cameras look like, and they have a little digital screen. So you don't see it in great detail. But we knew this is a once-in-a-lifetime photograph has been gotten.
Yeah, as soon as it came in. And of course, look, the newsrooms aren't as busy as they used to be. They used to be very busy, buzzy places with phones ringing everywhere. And it felt like a proper newsroom that day. I remember everybody's phone was going. People were hearing little bits about it. The news was starting to break about it. And of course, we were there sitting in the office with this photo. There's that sort of news sense in you that you want to run this.
Yeah.
And at the time, we weren't putting stuff up online. This would have been held for the paper on the Sunday, and this is a Friday afternoon. We had something really special here. But we also, I think, knew the guards were going to be desperate for that picture because they were two gunmen running from a scene of a crime. So it was a very compromised situation, and there was a bit of arguments going on, and there was voices were raised.
Totally. I mean, because it is complex. I mean, normally the journalism likes to keep itself separate from the Gardai investigations. So Gardai investigations go on and journalism reports on them. But obviously then you're put in this compromising position because you have guys running out visibly with handguns in their hands. And, they're obviously then disappeared into the ether. And you have to have a discussion about what is your civic responsibility in terms of, do you help the guards? You don't want these armed gunmen to run down the street and kill another few people. So it was a complex one, and people were aware straight away that the guards are going to want these pictures and want to use it for their purposes. And we also have our purposes, which is to tell what happened and to report on the news. So there was a conflict straight away.
From my memory, as the afternoon went on and, I was talking to contacts and to other people who were involved in crime journalism, etc., it became apparent that there were no guards at the weigh-in. That in actual fact, the guards didn't seem to be there at all. They were called literally by the hotel and had arrived in response to what had already gone on. Of course, David Byrne had been shot dead in the reception of the hotel. We were getting photographs in later in the day, which showed a very shocked-looking Liam Byrne standing outside the hotel, his hands in his pockets, standing beside his cousin Liam Rowe, another significant cartel member. There was no sign of Daniel Kinahan. I was getting calls from people who were telling me that these professional killers had been flown into the country and had already been flown out. There was rumours, there was spin, and also there was the general, I suppose, conversations in regards to, oh my God, what is going to happen next? I mean, all anyone knew for sure was something was going to happen. David Byrne was a very, very senior lieutenant. He was also from criminal royalty from the Byrne family. His brother-in-law is Thomas Bomber Kavanagh. His brother is Liam Byrne, and he's very much at the heart of the Kinahan cartel. We knew from the beginning that this attack had occurred as part of the rivalry between the Kinahan and Hutch factions of what was once the one organisation. And I think everybody was really trying to predict what this might lead to, but nobody could have guessed.
Nobody could have guessed. And of course, those rumours straight away went around. It was straight away focused on the Hutch gang. But at this time, if you remember, while there had been other incidents, for example, an attempted hit on Jerry Hutch in Lanzarote, it wasn't, those incidents weren't always public. People were straight away thinking this isn't the type of normal organised crime operation. They were looking at the weapons, saying, is there a paramilitary organisation involved here? Nobody knew fully. And of course, what people did fear straight away was, no matter what, people knew how big and how powerful the Kinahans had become, and the likelihood of them not striking back was inevitable. That blood was going to flow.
That bit absolutely 100%. But at that very early stage, I recall contacts of mine suggesting that the Hutches were an army. Did they have the backing of the dissidents? Was this going to, were they going to be very heavily armed because of that? They had contacts in the north. It was like as if people were trying to size up how two Premiership teams were going to play against one another. That's what it felt like. You've been listening to an extract from the Regency, 10 years on from the hit that changed gangland forever. Visit crimeworld.com and subscribe to hear the full series now. And you'll also get exclusive access to our other podcast deep dives on the Dapper Don, Christy Kinahan, Thomas Bomber Kavanagh, and more.